Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Welcome to the lecture to System Structure and Processes. In this lecture, we will cover the hierarchical structure in operating systems, types of kernel, system calls and interrupts, processes in operating systems, overview of process scheduling. Operating systems are layered, designed in a layered manner. There exist many layers like layer 0, layer 1 until layer n. So let's say the layer 0 has a hardware. Above the layer 0, layer 1 has kernel of the operating system. So above the kernel, let's say operating system can have system programs, okay, and application programs, example shell, etc. So the users, when they want to consume the services, they would consume the services which are available at the top layer. The layer at the top, okay, example this layer n, would consume the services which is existing before this layer, that is layer n minus 1, and layer n minus 1 would be consuming the service from the layer n minus 2, like that. Okay. So the operating system is divided into many layers. Each layer is built on other layer, lower level layers. The bottom layer 0 is the hardware. The highest layer is a user interface, okay, shell, etc. With modularity, layers are selected such that each uses functions and services of only lower level layers. So with the modularity approach, which I explained a little before, the top layer would consume the services available from the layers which lies below that. So layer n would consume the services from layer n minus 1. Hierarchical structure in operating system. So operating system must be carefully designed, and one central requirement is modularity. So to overcome the complexity in operating system design, the designers have introduced the modularity concept. So there are different types of programs like system programs, application programs and kernel programs, which we will discuss now. So different operating systems have different degrees of modularity. Okay, some operating systems are less modular in nature. Some operating systems are they enforce high degrees of modularity. So in all the operating system, in all the approaches, the system and application programs, they communicate to the hardware through the kernel. So kernel is a very important component in an operating system. It is an important module in an operating system. So all the system and application programs, they interact with the hardware through the kernel. So what is a kernel? A core component of an operating system without which operating system cannot work. It supports the core functions of an operating system such as process management, device management, etc. It is the interface between the upper layer programs and the hardware. So when you see this, you will understand. This is the architecture of Unix operating system. So in the Unix operating system, let's say we have the hardwares here. Okay. So hardwares are accessed through the controllers. Then above the controllers we have the kernel interface. Okay, so this is the interface through which the kernel of the operating system, this is the kernel of the operating system interact with the controllers. The kernel interact with the hardware through the kernel interface and the controllers. So the kernel is an important component of an operating system, and this component has many programs such as file system, okay, disk and tape drives, CPU scheduling programs, example chapter number 4, page replacement algorithms, which you would study in chapter number 8, virtual memory chapter number 8, demand paging chapter number 8, okay, um, swapping programs that you will see in chapter number I think 8, okay. So all these important programs are in the kernel of the operating system, okay. So above the kernel you have the system and application programs. Example for system programs is shell. So shell means the interface through which the user interacts with the kernel, okay, and also interpreters, compilers, all are existing above the kernel of the operating system, okay. So basically this is the user interface. So through this user interface we can create a folder. So when we create a folder, okay, and store some files, that would be stored in the hard disk, but through this shell interface, graphical user interface, okay. So this graphical user interface, through this graphical user interface we interact with the kernel of the operating system. So this is the shell. Actually shell can be of many types. So one type of shell is graphical user interface shells, okay. So another one, let's say it's command based shells, okay. So here everything like folder, so we have to, through the command we have to create the folders, through the commands we have to navigate from one folder to another, through the command we have to remove the folders, remove the files, etc., then configure the file permission, etc. So that shell is command based shells. So here lies the kernel. Above the kernel you have the shell and other system programs and also application programs. So above that there exists the users. So user, when they want to interact with the kernel, they have to interact through the shell or through some application programs. And okay, so if they want to create some folder in the disk, okay, save some files in the disk, that has to be done through application programs or through the shell. That request will go to the kernel. Kernel will initiate the action and perform that action on the device, okay. So system and application programs, they communicate with the kernel programs through the system call. So system call is the interface through which the system and application programs interact with the kernel of the operating system, okay. So if any programs above the kernel, they want to communicate with the kernel to perform some task, they have to use the system call. So above the system call, between the system and application programs and the kernel exists the system call interface. So now you would have got an idea about the kernel. So kernel has some important programs, very core programs related to process management and device management, okay. Examples also just now you saw. Now let us talk about the kernel architecture, how the operating system are designed. Different operating systems have different architecture style. Some operating systems have monolithic architecture, some operating systems are based on microkernel architecture, some operating systems are based on hybrid kernel architecture. So what is monolithic kernel architecture? Okay, monolithic kernel runs all the basic system services like process management, memory management, input output communication, interrupt handling. So what is interrupt handling, you will see in the later topics. What is a file system, you will see in the later topics. So all these are very important programs in the kernel, okay, that is used to manage the manage a system. So all these programs, example process management, which you will see like you want to create a process, For example, when you open a Microsoft Word, a process has to, okay, when you run a program, it becomes a process, okay. So when you execute any program, a process has to be created. So for that process, a memory has to be initialized. So in that memory address, the process code has to be loaded. So this is called process management, and which is related to memory management also, allocating the memory, managing the memory, paging, segmentation, which you will see in chapter number 7 and 8. Okay, so interrupt means it's a signal to the CPU, okay, from the hardware or from the software. So when any interrupt, when any interruption signal goes to the CPU, how the CPU has to handle, okay. So all these programs exist in the kernel space, everything in the same address space. So that is the nature of the monolithic kernel architecture. They doesn't exist in different layers. All these programs exist in the same layer. That's why we call it as monolithic architecture. In this kernel approach, the entire operating system programs runs as a single program. This memory management, interrupt handling, process management, all these programs, interrelated programs, exist in the same layer. They exist as, they run as a single executable file in the kernel mode. Okay, the operating system is written as a collection of procedures that are linked together into a large executable binary program. Okay, so here in the monolithic kernel architecture, these programs are tightly coupled to each other. They are linked to each other. Okay, so that is how the monolithic kernel architecture exists. Example is this. You can see the Linux or Unix system architecture. It is example for monolithic kernel architecture. In the kernel address space, all the programs, they exist together. Okay. Now you can see this is another architecture which we are going to discuss now. It is microkernel architecture. Some of the programs from the kernel are shifted to the layer above the kernel. So this is user mode layer. Okay, example, let's say device driver is shifted to the above layer. File system also shifted to the top layer. Okay, so the kernel mode has less number of programs. Okay, it is not heavy in nature, and they are not tightly coupled. I mean, they are not tightly connected to each other. They are loosely coupled. Okay. Actually, I am, without completing the monolithic, I am going to microkernel, but when you compare them and study, it is easy for you to understand. That's why I am just comparing both the things, architectures at the same time. And you can see here these programs, they interact with each other using message passing system. Okay, so please understand, students, the process means any program which are running, which are executing, which are in running state. Okay, so any program in running state is called as process. Okay, so you can see here task manager, you can see the processes. Okay, different processes here. So these are the processes. These are the processes. So when these programs are running, they are called as processes. So Google Chrome is okay, it's running now, it's a process. Is it clear to you? Calculator is a program, when it is running, it's a process. Camtasia Studio, when it is running, it is a process. Microsoft Word, okay, when it is executed, it's a process. Okay, so different processes, if they want to communicate with each other, like when we talk to when humans talk, want to interact with each other, we interact using some languages, English, Arabic, etc., right? Similarly, when the processes want to communicate with each other, they have to communicate by sharing the memory, option A. Another option is through a technique called message passing system, by sharing the memory, okay, or another technique, message passing system. So communication by sharing the memory we will see in chapter number 3, okay. Okay, so the processes in the microkernel architecture, they communicate with each other by message passing system. Now let us come back to monolithic. Now when you see the architecture of the Unix monolithic architecture and the microkernel, you can see the difference. So in the Unix monolithic architecture, all the programs they lying in the kernel, only shell program lies outside the kernel, okay, and the application programs and some interpreters, compilers like Java compiler, they are outside the kernel space, okay. What are the advantages of monolithic architecture? The execution speed is faster in monolithic kernel as compared to the microkernel. Of course, because in the monolithic architecture they are tightly coupled to each other, so the speed is faster when it is compared with the microkernel architecture. Less amount of code is needed to write the monolithic kernel compared to the microkernel. So it is a large process running in a single address space, and the functions can be accessed through the system call. So what is a system call, students? Please understand, when the shell, what is a shell? This is a shell, or in the Windows operating system or in Android, this is the desktop is the shell, okay. So from the application program or from the system program like shell, if you want to communicate, if you want to do some task, okay, please understand, this system or application programs, they have to send the request to the kernel through through something called, through an interface called system call. Is it clear to you? So using the system call, they communicate with the kernel of the operating system. So what are the disadvantages of monolithic kernel? When you want to add a new functionality, it is very bothersome actually. Why? Because since all the programs exist in the same layer, you have to do a complete comprehensive checking, testing. If some problem exists with a new module, then it could affect the entire system. So introducing the new functionality is very difficult. It doesn't mean it is not possible, it is possible, but it's very difficult compared to the microkernel architecture. So now you can compare the microkernel also. In the microkernel, introducing the new functionality is very easy because the kernel has less number of functionalities. Most of the functionalities are outside the kernel, okay. So and since the kernel is very lightweight, it is easy to deploy a new functionality in the microkernel architecture compared to the monolithic architecture. And if a service crashes, the whole system collapses. For example, if there is a problem with some programs, it would affect the entire system. Sometimes you get the point. Why? Because they exist as a single executable binary program. So if there is a problem with one program, one service, it would affect the entire monolithic kernel. Example of monolithic kernel are Linux and Unix operating system. So Ubuntu, Mint, so all these Linux and Unix like Solaris, they are based on the monolithic kernel architecture. So this is the example of monolithic kernel architecture from Unix operating system. So microkernel system architecture, the kernel is not heavy. Some programs from the kernel space moved on to the layer above the kernel, okay, moves as much from the kernel into user space, I mean the layer above the kernel. So the programs, they communicate using message passing system. Okay, have you ever heard about socket programming and all? Then you can understand the concept of message passing system. So let us continue this topic from microkernel architecture. So in the microkernel architecture, some of the programs are moved from the kernel space to the user space. You can see here file system and device driver, they are moved to the user space. So the programs in the microkernel architecture, they communicate with each other using the message passing system. So what is a message passing system? We will see at the end of this lecture. Okay. So there are two types of message passing system, direct and indirect. In the direct message passing system, processors, they directly send messages each other. The benefit of microkernel system architecture, it is easier to extend the microkernel. So if you want to add a new functionality, new program, it is easier since a microkernel architecture is lightweight and processors, they communicate with message passing system. So it is easier to integrate, and also each and every processes inside the microkernel architecture, they are loosely coupled, they are not tightly integrated. Okay, unlike monolithic. And also it is easy to load this operating system on new machines, new systems, like new architectures. So microkernel systems are more reliable. Why? Because the code is less, complexity is less, and it reduces the complexity and also reliability. It increases the reliability and also it increases the security also. Disadvantages, okay, however, the performance overhead is there in the microkernel system architecture compared to the monolithic, because here the processors, they have to interact with each other using the message passing system. Example of microkernel system architecture: GNU Mac and Minix 3. Hybrid kernel, it is a combination of both microkernel and monolithic kernel. This actually approach combines the speed. Okay, already we know that as far as the performance is concerned, monolithic architecture is better in terms of performance because they are tightly coupled system. As far as the modularity and execution safety is concerned, microkernel is better. So the hybrid kernel combines both the benefits, combines both the approaches. Example, Microsoft NT kernel architecture is a hybrid kernel architecture, and operating systems such as Windows 10, Windows Server, Windows Vista, Windows Server 2008, they are based on Microsoft NT kernel architecture. Now we will cover the topic system call. So what is a system call? It is programming interface to the services provided by the OS, written in the language, same language like kernel, typically C or C++. The set of system calls is termed the programmer interface to the system. Example, Win32 API for Windows, POSIX API for Unix, Java API for JVM. Okay, these are the system call APIs. Now let me show the system call. So this program, I have type this in the Linux system. So this system is a C program like Java, okay, the C program. The student's point of view, you need not memorize the code. Actually, you have to understand the concept. In theory, you are learning what is a system call. So practically you have to know, you have to see what is a system call. That's the idea here. Before I go into the program, okay, just you can see here, these are the types of system call: process control, file manipulation, device manipulation, housekeeping, then communication. These are the different categories of system call. So the first category is process control. So what is a process? If a program starts running, it becomes a process. Okay. So when, for example, here if I invoke this Word program, actually it's a program, okay, it's a file. So when I click this file, when I try to open the file, what happens? A process has to be created for the Microsoft Word. So for that you need a system call. Okay, so operating system using the system call, it would create a process, and Microsoft Word opens, and the file, to open the file in the Microsoft Word also a system call has to be used. Do you understand? Okay. Without the system call, it is difficult, it is not possible for the application or system programs to interact with the kernel. Okay. So to control the process, okay, you need some system calls. For example, okay, to create a process, to terminate, to temporarily suspend, and then to resume, okay, abort, you need some system calls. Okay. Now this process, when you see this program source code, you should, okay, know what you have to identify. What is a system call? Here there is a system call, then here there is a system call, so here there is a system call. So this program is using how many system call? 4, execlp, then exit and wait. So it is using these many system calls. Okay. So what is the use of these system calls? What exactly they are doing? So fork is basically a system call in Linux or Unix environment. It is used to create a child process. Okay, a process is creating another process. A process means when a program runs, it becomes a process. Okay, when you run demo.c, a process is created. Okay, now this process actually is creating another process. Okay, if you have studied the concept of multi-threading, you can understand easily. In a single program, you can create many threads, and you can make each and every thread to do some task individually, concurrently, at the same time. So similarly, you can make a process. Okay, actually the threads are inside the process. Okay, here what we do is we make a process to create another process, not thread, another process, a child process. So to create a child process, the fork system call is used. So until this statement, okay, only one process running. So after this fork statement system call, two processes are there. One is called parent and another one is called child. Okay. Now two processes are there. How to distinguish the parent and the child? You get the point? There are two processes running. We want to control both the process, parent process and the child process. So this block belongs to the child and this block belongs to the parent. How we know? When we use the fork system call, okay, we get a return value. That return value is captured in a variable p. The p stores the return value from the fork system call. Using this value, we can distinguish between the parent and the child. If the p value is 0, then okay, we put a block. So inside the block, okay, that block belongs to child. So whatever the child process we want the child process to do, that code we can define inside the child block here. And whatever the okay, the else block, okay, if the p value is not 0, that block belongs to parent. So please understand, students, when we use the fork system call, and if a process create another process, now two processes are running, one is parent and another one is child. So both the processes are running concurrently, they are running concurrently. So we have to control them, okay, wisely. So to control, we should identify who is parent, which block belongs to parent, which blocks belong to child. So this block belongs to parent and child, and this block belongs to parent. How we know? Using the p value. Now here we want the child program to do some task. We want the child to run some executable. We want the child to do something. Okay. Okay, so let us make the child to do some simple things. Okay, let us make the child to print a date, today date. So we make the child, we want the child to run the date program. To make the child run the some executable, we have to use the system called execlp. So using the system called execlp, we make the child to run some executable code. Okay, example date program. After the child finishes everything, we want the child to exit, terminate. Okay, so exit system call is used. Now another thing is, when the child is executing these things, statements, we do not want the parent to terminate, we want the parent to wait, because both the parent and the child, they are running concurrently, same time. So how we can do? We are telling the parent, please wait until the child finishes these three statements. Okay, the parent has to wait, it shouldn't terminate, it shouldn't do anything. So it would wait until the child execute the exit statement. So once the child executes the exit statement, parent would start its execution, it would print this statement and terminate. So here please understand, fork system call is used by the parent process to create a child process. Then the execlp system call is used to load and execute execute a executable in a process address space, memory space. Then exit system call is used, okay, to terminate. If all the executions are over, it has to terminate using exit system call. Then wait system call is used by the parent to wait for the child to finish the task. Okay, until the child finishes, the parent won't terminate. Okay, so this is the example, okay, by which you can understand the concept of system call. Control X. Now let me run this program. So you have to compile like this: gcc demo.c -o space the name of the executable code. Then you get some warning, it's okay. Then / the name of the executable. So this is the output. You can see child process is printing the date. Then after the child process finishes the task, the parent is doing its task and completing. Okay, now let us go here. These are the some of the system calls in Unix and Windows operating system. Okay, it belongs to these categories like process control, file manipulation, device manipulation, okay, information maintenance, communication, protection. Is it clear to you? So you need not memorize all these system calls, just understand what is a system call, how it look like. However, so these are the system calls, different system calls in both Unix and Windows operating systems. So this image shows the relationship between the application program and system call and kernel. So the application program uses a system call called open to open a file, and through this system call it makes a request to the kernel. The kernel based on the system call request, it opens the file and then it returns the control back to the user application. So the user application, for example, in this case, so here example we are using fork system call. So application is the demo.c. It uses the fork system call and execlp, exit and wait system calls. So when this application sends a request through these system calls, the kernel would perform the appropriate actions. Example, creating the process like that. So next concept is, what is a process? Process is a program in execution. Okay, if any program executes, then it becomes a process. So when a user executes a program, then the operating system would create the process. So for each and every process, it would create a structure called process control block, PCB, process control block, and in the PCB it would store all the informations about a process. Different types of informations that are stored in a process control block are code section, data section, process stack, program counter, then CPU register informations, memory information and accounting information. So let us take this Java program. Okay, so when this program are compiled and interpreted, okay, similarly this C program, when it is compiled, control X, so ls, you can see here, when the program is compiled using this statement, okay, what happens, a executable code is created. Okay, so we cannot see the executable code in the clear text. So this is the executable code. So this information about the executable code would be stored in the code section. So when a process starts running, okay, so the operating system would create a process control block and store all these informations. So first type of information is code information. So it would store the executable code of a particular process in the code section. Then data section, okay, any process would be having a global variable. For example, in this program, the demo class has a variable x, so it's a global variable. So this is visible across the entire class. It can be accessed from the main method or any method within this class. Okay, so these are public variables. So the data section would store the information about global variables in a program. Process stack stores the information about local variables and the functions which are used within a program. Okay, for example, okay, so this is a local variable a and b, and this is a method inside a class. So process stack basically stores the information about the local variables and the method. Subroutine means methods or functions within a program. So program counter is a pointer. It points to some location in the program code. Some it would point to a specific location in the program code. So like example, which instruction has to be executed next. So like that, this pointer would be pointing to a certain location in the programming code. So when a process is running and when some computations happening, during that time, okay, the values would be stored in the CPU registers. So you can see in chapter number 5, process synchronization, you can clearly understand this concept. So just understand when example, so you can see here this counter plus plus. This method has a variable counter. It execute this statement counter plus plus. So when this counter statement executed, it would store the values in the register. Okay, during the computation, it would store the values in the register. Okay, so load, update, store. You can we can go in detail in chapter number 5. Okay, so just understand when some computation process takes place with variables, okay, that time some values are stored in the CPU registers. So these values would be stored in the CPU register for a particular process. When a process is running, please understand the process cannot run continuously, okay, because the system supports many processes at the same time. So context switching will take place, so that you will see in chapter number 4. So a process cannot continuously run with the CPU. Okay, it will run, then it would be suspended for some time, then it would resume the operation, like that. So whatever the circumstance, the process would make use of the registers and it would store some values in the register while during the computation process, and these register values are specific to a particular process. Then memory management information, like paging or segmentation concept, which you will learn in chapter number 7 and 8. Okay, so like which pages are loaded into the memory, which pages are not loaded into the memory, the pages are loaded into which frames of the memory. Okay, so these kind of informations are stored in the memory management informations. Okay, so you can understand very clearly after chapter 7 and 8. And other informations like which user has initiated a process, how long it is running, how much CPU time it is used. So all these things comes under accounting information. So you can see here, okay, so how much CPU time it is utilizing, which user has initiated the process. All these informations we can call it as accounting information. If you take a process can exist in different state. When a process is created, it exists in a state called new. Then the process goes to running state. When it is when it is running with the CPU, that time it is in running state. when its instructions are executed by the CPU, that time the process is in running state. When the process waiting for some event to happen, that time the process is in waiting state. For example, when a process is running, that time if it executes any input or output instructions. Okay, so here you can see this is output statement. Okay, here there is output statement. Similarly, okay, here in the Java also, okay, this is output statement. Similarly, you might have studied scanner, scanning, getting input from the keyboard, that is an input statement. When a process is doing some input or output operation, that time the process would be in waiting state. And after it finishes the waiting state, it would go to ready state. So in the ready state, the process is waiting for the CPU to be assigned. It is ready to run with the CPU. Okay, so in that situation, the process would be in ready state. So if it finishes all the statement, then it would be terminated. So these are the different process states: new, running, waiting, ready, and terminated. So it is explained with a diagram. The new process, when it is created, it goes to ready state. From ready state, it goes to running state. While the program is running, if any interrupt happens, then it would come back to ready state. If the process finishes all the tasks, then it would exit. It would go to terminated state. If the process performs any input or output operation, then it would come to waiting state. And when the input or output finishes, then again it would come to ready state. From ready state, again it would go to running state. So many processes would be ready and waiting for the CPU. So if operating system assigns a CPU to a particular process, then the scheduler would dispatch the process. Okay, the process would be given the CPU, and the CPU process would start running with the CPU. So process scheduling, we will discuss this in chapter 4 in detail. Maximize the CPU use. So a process cannot continuously use the CPU, and CPU cannot be shared simultaneously by the processors. They cannot use the CPU at the same time. So it has to be each and a process would use the CPU for some amount of time, then it has to go to ready state, and another process would get the CPU, like that. Okay, the operating system has to manage the CPU among different processes. So quickly switch processes onto CPU for time sharing. So process scheduler selects among available processes and assign the CPU to the next process for execution. So in the operating system, there are some queues available: job queue, ready queue, and device queue, that I can explain using this queuing diagram. When a process is created, initially the process would go to the first job queue. Okay, so let's say there is a job queue here. So from the job queue, the process enters the ready queue. So here many processes would be waiting: P1, P2, P3. So like that. So here job queue is here. So from the job queue, the process comes here, then here many processes would be running, waiting here. Now let's say there are two processes P1 and P2 are waiting. Now the scheduler has to decide which process among the P1 and P2 would get the CPU next. So the scheduler basically puts the processes in a specific order and decides which process would get the CPU next. There are two types of schedulers. One is short term scheduler and long term scheduler. So just please understand there is a job queue here. I will explain the schedulers. Before that, please understand the job queue here, ready queue is here. So when the process is created, it goes to the job queue, and then from the job queue it goes to the ready queue. Then from the ready queue, actually here there would be set of processes waiting here in the job queue. So the long term scheduler program would select the process which has to be sent to the ready queue. Then there is another scheduler, category of scheduler, that is called short term scheduler, that would select the processes which would get the CPU next. Okay, then the process when it performs any input or output operation, then it would go to the device queue, IO queue. Is it clear to you? So when the process does any print statement or scanning read statement, then it would go to the device queue, IO queue. Then after it completes the input or output, it would again go back to the ready queue. When the process in the chapter 4, you will see the CPU schedulers in detail. In that there is a algorithm called round robin algorithm, scheduling algorithm. So in the round robin algorithm, each and every process would get would have a time quantum. So they can use the CPU for the amount of time specified in the time quantum, like 4 millisecond or 3 millisecond, like that. So when that time quantum expires for a particular process, then the process has to go back to the ready queue. They will go and stand in the ready queue, then again they will get the CPU. Okay, so we can discuss that in chapter 4 in detail. So just now you understand that when the time slice expired, time quantum expired for a particular process, it has to go back to the ready queue. Similarly, when a process is running and if the process creates a child process, then what happens? It will go back to the ready queue. Then a process is running. So during that, when any interrupt happens, suppose for example, when a program is running, some error condition happens. So when error condition happens, it would send a signal to the CPU. We call that as a trap. Okay, so in that situation, what happens? If any interrupt happens, when a process is running, if there are any error conditions, due to that error conditions, the signal interrupt signals would be sent to the CPU, and the process again has to go back to the ready queue. So this diagram is called queuing diagram. Job queue is here. When a process is created, it would go to the job queue. From the job queue, the long term scheduler would select which process has to go to the ready queue, and that process will enter the ready queue. So in the ready queue, there would be many processes waiting for the CPU. Okay, the short term scheduler programs, they will select the process which has to get the CPU next, and then the process would get the CPU and run. Then when the process is running, if in the process if there are any input or output statement, then the process will go to IO queue. So here the process is in ready state, here the process is in running state, and here the process is in waiting state. And also when a process is running, if the time quantum expires, then context switching takes place and the process will be sent to the ready queue. Again it will get the chance. For example, you want to pay bill, electricity bill, example, you are going to office to pay electricity bill. So you have, let us say you have 10 bills, 10 bills. So you go to the counter to pay the bill, but there is a condition actually applied for each and every customer, that is each and every customer can pay only 5 bills at a time, faturas, 5 bills. Okay, so after paying 5 bills, actually you have 10 bills, so you can pay 5 bills, and again you have to go back and wait in the ready queue with 5 bills in your hand. So you will get the next chance where you can pay another 5 bills. Similarly, the process would have a burst time that you will see in chapter number 5. So it defines how much time a process needs the CPU. Okay, so and also each and every process, according to this round robin algorithm, there is a time quantum. So when the time quantum expires, what happens, the process will go to the ready queue if their burst time still not finished. Similarly, just now you saw in the same chapter, when a process create a child process, it goes to the ready queue. And also when any error condition happens, okay, when there is any interrupt, okay, the signal goes to the CPU, and the process goes to the ready queue. So job queue, set of all processes in the system. Initially it will go to the job queue, then from the job queue the process will go to ready queue, set of processes residing in main memory and waiting to get the CPU, waiting for the execution. So device queue means IO queue, so set of process waiting for an input or output device. Okay, so the process move from one queue to another during the process execution. And also the types of scheduler we discussed, there are two types of schedulers. Long term decides which jobs or processes has to be loaded onto the disk should be moved to main memory. So I have told you there is a job queue here, so which process has to be moved into the ready queue, or job has to be moved into the ready queue, that would be decided by the long term scheduler. Now another types of scheduler program exist that would choose how to allocate the CPU between the processes which are ready to execute. So here there is a ready queue, here there are many processes waiting. So among the waiting processes, which process has to get the CPU next, that would be decided by the short term scheduler. So please understand there are two types of schedulers. We will discuss about the short term scheduler in chapter number 4 using algorithms such as FCFS, round robin, priority scheduling algorithm, etc. So what are the different operations that can be performed on a process? Okay, process can be created, it can be terminated, etc. So let us discuss the process creation. Just now you saw this program. Okay, so the program, you saw how a process is created using fork system call. So parent process can create a children process which in turn create other processes. So for example, you can see here in Unix operating system Linux, initially there the kernel creates a single process called init, and that would create a child process called login. Now once again the login would create a child process called bash. Bash would create a child process called ps. Similarly, init would create a child process called kthread, and kthread would create a child process called khelper, and init would create a child process called sshd, like that. So a process would be created, and that process can create a child process, and that child process can again create another child process. So for this child process, who is the parent? This is the parent. For this process, who is the parent? This is the parent process. For this process, the parent process is this, and each and every process has a process ID, unique ID number in the system that would identify a process. So parent process create a child process, which in turn create other processes, forming a tree of processes. You can see a tree like this. So this is what we discussed here. Okay, a child process creation using fork system call. Generally, a process is identified via a ID called process ID. Okay, resource sharing. Parent and children can share all the resources. Children share subset of parent resources. Parent and child share no resources. Sometimes they don't share resources if they if explicitly we define things like that. So execution options: parent and children execute concurrently. Parent wait until children terminate. For example, if the parent creates a child, they can share the memory, okay, resources, and also other subset of resources. And suppose if we don't want that to happen, we can explicitly, using the system call, we can deny the sharing things. We can deny resource sharing. Okay, parent and children execute concurrently. So when the child process is created, they both, this block and this block, they run together simultaneously, concurrently. That is why, we want the parent to wait until the child finishes. So we use a system called wait. Okay. So parents and children can run concurrently. Parents wait until children terminate. For example, let's say this is the parent process in Linux operating system. It is creating a child process here, login, and this is creating another child process, bash. So let's say the child is running. While the child is still running, if the parent terminates, okay, it is not good, right? So the parent has to wait until all the child process finishes. That is why this statement is given. Parents wait until children terminate. So using this system call, we can make the parent wait until the children terminate. So in Unix operating system or Linux, fork system call is used to create a new process. Already we have discussed that using the C program. And also exec system call used after fork to replace the process memory space with a new program. Example, this one. So execlp. So this is another system call, same, both are same only. So this system call is used to change the memory address space. Another executable code is loaded into the child memory space, and that executable is executed. So execlp or exec, both are same. System call used after the fork to replace the process memory space with a new program. Example, in our program, in the example, date program is loaded into the child address space and executed. So process execute last statement. Process can be terminated using the exit system call. Parent may terminate the execution of children process using abort system call. Your parent, if it wants, for example, this parent can terminate the child using abort system call, which we are not doing here. But if the parent wants to terminate the child explicitly, then it would use the abort system call. And also the parent would wait for the child to finish using the wait system call. Okay. So these are the different types of system calls. So this is a sample program which already we have discussed. So with this I conclude this lecture. Students, in this lecture we have discussed about the layered approach. Operating systems are have different layers. Different types of operating system has different layers. Okay, and what is a kernel? It's a very important component of the operating system. Okay, it would have very important programs like process management, file system, etc., device management, etc. The kernel architecture can be classified into monolithic, microkernel and hybrid. We discussed each and everything with advantages and disadvantages and with a sample structure Unix for the monolithic. Okay, microkernel we discussed, and we discussed the microkernel architecture also. We have seen the examples. Then we covered what is a system call, then types of system call, then system calls in Unix and Windows. I told you not to memorize everything, but be the system calls which are given in this lecture, last two slides, please remember them. Then this explains the relationship between the application program, system call and the kernel. Then what is a process, what is a process control block, what are the components of a process, what are the states of your process we discussed. Okay, transition of process state. Then what are the different types of queues, then what are the different types of scheduler we discussed. Okay, queuing diagram we discussed. Okay, and then process creation, then process tree, then the system calls fork, exec, and wait, exit, and abort we have discussed. So with this I conclude the chapter 2. Thank you very much.